Good morning, and thanks for joining today. I'd like to welcome you to the 2014 OmniVue Year-End Close Seminar for Dynamics GP. I certainly appreciate your time, and I hope you find this session valuable. You know, we always appreciate your feedback, and if you can think of any additional topics or seminars that we could produce for you, please feel free to share. My name is Sean Nichols, and I'm a Client Success Manager here at OmniVue. Also, please note that we are recording this session so you can have access to it at any time. I would like to make a couple of brief announcements. As you may have already seen through emails, OmniVue does have a current promotion going that should you have the need for 3 or more additional GP licenses, you can save 15% up until December 19th. Also, you may have noticed that there is a new release of GP 2015. As we get more information, we're going to be sure to share that with you. But if you have any questions on these announcements or anything else, always feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to assist. Now, please allow me to introduce today's presenter, Ian Messerby. Ian is a Dynamics GP Senior Application Specialist and a member of our client support team. He brings many years of experience in the Dynamics GP environment and client care solutions, support, and of course year-end closing. We are very glad to have him with us today, and with that, please allow me to turn the presentation over to Ian.
Thank you, Sean, for that introduction. Thank you for everybody for attending today. What I want to do is first we'll hit our agenda. It's what you saw on the invite. First, we're going to go through our modules, inventory, receivables management, payables management, fixed assets, and then our general ledger, after which we'll have a Q&A at the end. From here, we'll go right into our live demo. I've got the inventory module pulled up here. It's going to be our first one we'll take through to the closing process. One thing that I want to start on, and I'll probably harp on throughout the demo, is the need for backups. It's important to do the backups. You're going to be doing critical steps throughout this, and it's just a good idea to do it because you don't want to have the heartache and the headache of making it so far along the way and then something to go bad in one of your processes and then you have to start over from the beginning. So it's important while you're doing your planning to go ahead and include, okay, we're going to do a backup here, we're going to do a backup here. For the moment though, we're good and no backup is recommended at the start of this for the moment. So as we're going into the inventory, the objective of closing, or most of these modules anyways, is to get the calculations, the data that's in our current year, and go ahead and push it to historical. We're clearing balances, we're zeroing them out, and that's essentially what this year-end process is doing. As with all modules, this will be repeated over and over, is that we're going to need to post current year, or 2014 in this case, any transactions, batches that are still needing to post in the 2014 time frame. We can go into the batch, select it, and just review any batches that you have out there and assure yourself that you don't have anything left. In your planning, if you'd like, because it is obviously you want to go through and take a look at all the transactions in each one of the modules, depending on if you're using the module or not, of course. But take a look, and you can, depending on how you want to do it in your needs, plan on doing that step, go through all the modules, take a look, any transactions for the year you're trying to close, take care of it, and then of course you can skip that step as we go through this process of closing out. So after you've secured, made sure that you've Make sure that you've posted everything for this 2014. You move on to the reconcile. This is something most of you, hopefully you've actually been doing it as a maintenance item throughout the year, but if you are in inventory and you're trying to do a year-end close, you definitely want to go through this process and get it completed. You'll just select your full item range. If you haven't done this before, it actually would be a good idea to do a backup. That way you know what you're getting yourself into. And if you haven't done the reconcile before, you might want to go ahead and make sure that you do include item history. Once you reconcile, this is going to get the tables going, looking at all the transactions having to do with those items, and is going to be making adjustments accordingly. Once you've done this reconcile procedure, you'll move on and you want to do a physical stock count. Now this may or may not fit in with your process, of course, but if it does, this is a good time to do that physical stock count. Go through, and once you have that count, come back, make your adjustments, and then you can move forward from there. After that, you'll want to go into reports and get some of those final reports run for yourself. The common reports that, depending on your industry, that you want to print at this time, recommended ones are going to be your stock status report, your purchase receipts report, your turnover report, your transaction history report, serial number list, and lot number list. Once you have those reports out of the way, now would definitely be a good time to make your backup. And from here, you can go into year-end close. When you pull up this window, as you can see, there are several different options that you can choose before you run this process. Discontinued items, your sold lot, your sold receipts. Sold receipts, you actually get an extra feature in there, but we'll go through the other two first. And any of these really, you're going to be actually removing information from the tables. So on items that maybe you haven't used for 5 or more years, same thing with your lots that you've changed things or you're no longer using that lot, you'll select these at this time and it will remove it from the system. There's no going back, there's no recovering it. This is, I mean, that's the point of this, is to go ahead and remove that from your system so that you no longer have it in, you're not seeing it, it's not coming up on reports. Your sold receipts and cost change, the difference is with this, say you've been collecting information for the past 10 years, at this point you'll have an opportunity, say instead of the last 10 years, you want to scope it back only to the last 7 years, maybe differently depending on your needs, of course. Select that date range and plug it in. Once you've gone from there, we've got our update to the item standard cost. What that essentially is doing is taking a look at, again, at all your transactions for your items and valuing that cost throughout the year. As we know, the costs fluctuate, so it's going to take all that into account, average it out, and give you your new item standard cost. Once you've got your selections made, from there you'll go ahead and process. One thing I'd like to point out, I'll probably point it out again, is that whereas in this inventory module, in this sense, it will remove items from the table, there's other modules that we're going to see in AR where we remove and actually pushes open items into history. So in this sense, it is an actual deletion from the tables. In that sense, when we talk about that later, it's going to be just moving it from open to history. When you go through and you process, you'll see it go through. It'll actually, your GP might actually freeze, or it might seem like it's freezing, but it's actually going through its process. Let it go, Try not to double click on these, especially on some of the other modules, because you might end up closing 2 years. But in this case, it's not doing it. When it's completed processing, depending on your module, there's going to be reports that are going to come out. Some of these reports, it'll be your only time to print that information. So make sure that you've got your printer set up and ready to go prior to doing any of this processing. And just a reminder, print setup, you can do this at the beginning. Get in here, make sure that you selected your correct one that you want, and of course OK. And that way when you do run it and you go to screen or to printer, it's already there ready to go. That will conclude our inventory part. Our next item is going to be accounts receivable, or your sales module. For those of you that are using your SOP, your sales order processing, you're going to want to go through and first take care of those items. Go through, again, you're posting all your current year transactions, or the 2014 transactions. You're going through and making sure that you've invoiced all the orders that you've shipped out. And from there, you can move on to your sales. Once again, you're looking at posting all those transactions. Also at this point, with here, you can pull this up. Reconcile, remove sales documents. Now this one isn't as bad as it sounds. They've changed it over the year. They say remove completed documents. What this is really doing is it's moving all those open items that you have and moving it into history, so that you're still going to have a record. So unlike the inventory, you're not deleting anything out. Also a good note here, those of you who haven't seen this, a lot of times when you have these windows up, when you have a print report only, it's actually going through and giving you a representation of what it's going to look like prior to actually removing the completed document. So it'll give you your full list of what it's going to be removing out. From here, we're going to head over into purchasing. One item that I'm thinking of that I could have mentioned earlier really, but in our setups, as you're doing some of this year-end closing, it'll be a good idea to come over to your fiscal periods, choose your forward years, your back years, and make sure that you've got everything closed out for 2015 or for 2013 if you still have some open items. That way, when you're doing this year-end close process, it decreases the likelihood of you posting in a period that you didn't mean to as you're closing everything out. And of course, you'll want to open those back up afterwards. Again, with our purchasing, you want to go ahead and start with your purchase order processing for those of you that are using that. Go through, post your batches. If you can, it might be a good time to go ahead and go through and apply what you have available and get that out of the way. Get it all lined up a little better. Excuse me. After you've got your purchase order processing completed, you're going to go ahead and run over to your payables. Go through, again, posting once again. From there, you want to print your age trial balance with report. For this purpose, we're just going to choose demo. We'll modify. If you want, you can create an option, save it for later use. go through, fill out the relevant information that's applying to you, and then go through and look through your report, make sure that you're okay with it. At this point, we're going to start running into our 1099s. Of course, at this point, again, it's also going to be a good idea to get your backups going. You've done a lot of work, again, up until this point, and most of you are using at least this payables item. As you go through your 1099s, you may or may not know there's a good amount of time that you can go through and edit on your vendors, taking a look at what they have, making sure that those items are correct, that they're selected as a 1099. Once you've made all your edits, you feel good about it, go ahead and print your 1099s. And once you've done that, at this point, go ahead and make an additional backup. From there, we can go ahead and go into our year-end close for payables. If you'd like, you can choose to close all years, not all years, excuse me. If you'd like, you can close both your fiscal and your calendar year. Depending on your environment, you may want to close one at one time and one at the other, and it may not even be at a year end for the fiscal. Of course, going through this process, you're clearing out, especially with calendar, fiscal, you're clearing out certain calculations within GP, and that are going to reset so that when you're looking at your new year, everything's calculating according to that year. It should give you a last closing date for those of you who have closed before. Depending on when you closed, it'll show you the actual date that you completed it, even though it's for the 2014. So for a 2014 year later on, or sorry, for this 2013, you might have 3/15/2014, but again, that was closing out the 2013 year at that time. At this point, there's also the tax year-end close, which you can get to from Tools, Routines, Company. Choose your date, and close your year. As you're going through some of these modules, it does come down to, what you would like to do as far as your preparation. Do you want to close these? We have, throughout, depending on your industry, there's a lot of clients who may or may not close a module ever. And that's, of course, a decision that you guys are going to take into account for your own needs, and of course we'll be available to discuss that with you if you'd like. But a lot of these in some ways tend to be optional, and the main important one is going to be that general ledger year-end, because that's actually pushing the financial information into that next year. Again, if you haven't done a backup in a while, now would be a good time after you've finished your payables. From here, we're going to move on to financial. And really, we're going to be moving into the fixed assets from here before we hit the GL, of course. And if you are going to be doing a fixed asset close, you'll want to do that payables close. For those of you who are using fixed assets, you're going to go ahead and depreciate your assets throughout towards the end of the year. Of course, pick your date, your appropriate books, and going through that process. This will, of course, get your fixed assets in line or your sub-ledger in line with where you're going. At some points, you may decide not to go ahead and excuse me. You may not want to go to the GL posting at this time. You can do that a bit later. It all depends, again, on what your objectives are. Of course, one of the items to look over at this point is going to be your fixed asset calendar, and make sure that that's lined up and ready to go and that your next year has been built up. Speaking of which, I know I already showed you the fiscal periods and closing those out. Not thinking about it, a lot of you may or may not have even created your 2015 year. So I can touch on that real quick. For those of you who haven't done it before, what you're really going to do is, it's really not going to be an option here. So if I wanted to create 2020 here, you're actually going to type it in. You're going to choose your date range, whatever it may be. Some of your fiscals are not on your calendar. Plug in your periods, like 24. Calculate. And GB does the work. Verify that you're good with the dates that it's specified. If not, go in, make an adjustment to the date. You want to make it at the 18th instead. You can do so. And then from there, you're just saying, okay. And you've created your new one. What it's referring to, if you do see this message, it's not a critical message. It's just letting you know that because you've made some changes in a period, that if you want those calculations to be according per period, you're going to need to go through and reconcile those items in order for the calculations to appear in the correct periods that you've done or changed. From here, let's go ahead and head into our actual financials. Of course, this is the big one for most everybody. Everybody's going to want to do this in order to progress their financials. Make sure that you've closed whatever modules that you're going to want to close prior to doing this, of course. Again, a backup would be a good time. Go ahead and take that on at the moment. Post in your final entries for the 2014 year. You may have several entries, of course, that you've already started on for the 2015 by that point when you're closing. Just a heads up that there will be, when you're closing, it'll give you an error saying, hey, you have some batches out there. And it just is a heads up letting you know that you have transactions, and it's wanting you to be sure that those are for the 2015 and not the 2014 year. One of the big things that I find that comes back to bite us in doing the general ledger close is on our posting accounts and making sure that you selected a balance sheet versus profit and loss. So you're going to want to go through and run a report and make sure that you go through all those accounts, especially any new ones, and that you've selected the proper type. That way, because when you're closing, of course, some of it's going to go into accounts receivable, while some of it's just going to roll over. Go ahead and show you that report. Again, I'm selecting demo. There may be several of you that already have a lot of options done, but for those of you who haven't done it, it's just you're setting your parameters, and you can keep those parameters time after time and allowing, just for ease of use and shortening your daily procedures down a little bit. Go through, you'll select your segment ID and select your range. I'm going to select the short range since it's not cooperating with me here. Insert. Again, when you're saving some of these report modifications, if you'd like to, the destination here, you can choose whether it's even going to go to this screen or whether you just want to go to the printer each time and you're not concerned with seeing it on the screen. For the most part, in my line, I pretty much do everything to screen. I like to see it prior, but you can set that there, and then of course we'll go from print to there. If you haven't already done so, wrap up that last period close. Obviously, you're going to be thinking about that as you're going through anyways, so you probably already have that done. You want to verify several settings in the general ledger itself, just to make sure that you're satisfied whether you're keeping up with history or not. You want to maintain history accounts. Later on, when you're working with adjustments, auditors, you can have this selected or not selected as it may be for a while, but when you're working with the auditors, you can select that. And what that does is it does allow posting to prior years. Of course, you're going to have to open that period back up to allow for that posting. But what takes place is actually a double GL entry. It's going to make both the entry that you're wanting to make, and it's also going to make a year-end entry, as if you did the year-end close for it, and it would have made that entry at that time. So again, it is doing, whenever you're posting to history like that, it's going to do a double journal entry, both for the distribution you're actually wanting to make, and then as if it had been there for the year-end close. And as some of you know, GP does like to be temperamental. Some things you can close, and other things you got to clear before you close. Attention to detail. Once you've gotten that and you're ready to go, make sure that you've already printed out all your reports you're good with your financials, dotted all your I's, crossed all your T's, and happy with those numbers. If you haven't set up that new fiscal year, now would definitely be the appropriate time to get that done, because as you're closing this out, it's going to want to write into that new year. If that year is not there, it's going to come up with an error because it can't post to what's not there. For the year-end close, double check your retained earnings. For those of you who are wanting to close into multiple retained earnings, you are going to have to choose your main retained earnings account and then do appropriate ledger transactions after the fact. You can at this time also remove unused segments, and if you'd like, you can maintain inactive accounts. With 2013, they did introduce a feature that some of you may or may not have used, or it may come in handy. It's the ability to reverse a historical year. What is that? What that essentially is doing is undoing everything that this year-end process is about to do. In the past, it was a very arduous item. You had to get in contact with your partner, you who then had to contract with Microsoft and then get it open in order for you to do whatever was necessary in your processes so that the books would come out the way they needed to account for auditing or other items that were where you couldn't do a historical posting. And then once you're good, you're happy with what year it's closing to, close your year. It's important to remember when you are doing these and you do have these windows open, because of the way things process, you might, I'm pretty sure several of you are familiar with, it may look like GP's lagging, but is going through and doing its processes, so there is a bit of a stall at times on these windows. When you hit this year-end close or any close option, make sure that you're not double-clicking on there, because pretty quickly you can go through and close a second year when you didn't mean to. So when you hit it, just allow it to look. If you are curious, you can always head over into your process monitor, take a look, and see if there's anything processing at that time. Pretty much, I mean, that comes in it's easier said than done, so to speak. You have your 5 modules. They're closed, but of course it's going to take everyone a bit longer to do that, I imagine. Make sure as you're doing it that you've got, again, go ahead, start making your plans if you haven't already. In those plans, make sure that you're throwing backups in there at appropriate times, because those, again, it's the most horrible feeling to know that you've lost that much work and that you're going to go not only have to go back through those closing processes, but any daily processes that you have been doing in that time frame you lose as well and have to redo. It's a mess. Backups are important. For the moment, that is going to end that portion. Not sure if we have any questions up and going. Let me take a look. If you have any questions and you'd like to go ahead and put them out there, we'll see if we can answer them. There was a question asked about the backup. Backups, you're largely going to have to depend on either someone who knows the database side and who can log into the server, get onto the SQL server, which is where all the data is warehoused for GP, go in there and back up the company. For you, those of you with multiple companies, this means you're going to be doing backups, multiple backups throughout for each company. Generally, of course, you're going to want to take it company by company. or you can take it section by section, but make sure that, again, when you are doing those backups, or when you're making sure that you're looking to do those backups, that you're backing up the appropriate company. And when I say you, it might end up being us a lot of times, especially for you, for those of you that are hosted with us. We are going to be working in conjunction with you. Any needs that you have, we're going to get them taken care of, and we'll be there the whole time to help you get through that process. For those of you who don't have our contact information, we're going to go ahead and get that up for you. Like I said, all of you are valued to us, and we appreciate your time. I hope we've given you a good little introduction to your year-end close process.